So I was assigned a very specific topic, altruism in economic thought, which means that it is within economic thought. It may be a little larger than economics, but it's not very different from economics. But of course, there has been a historical evolution. And altruism, what has been said about altruism in this discussion along the decades or the few centuries it has started. And I will keep within this limit. Now, it seems to me that there is a narrative to be told about altruism in economic thought, which is sometimes interesting. But if I start to tell the narrative, it may last a few hours, which is beyond the limits. So I thought it may be good that first I present the table of contents. So first, there is the question of the reputation of economists and of economics, and the idea that one of their problems is that they assume selfish individuals, exclusively self-interested individuals. We'll try to see if it is true or if it is not true, both if they do this or not, and both if this assumption is true or false or whatever. And actually, it will turn out that the answer is quite ambivalent. On the one hand, they have quite often made this assumption. On the other hand, there is a very long line of study of altruism in economic thought, dated back several centuries from the early beginning of the discipline, of the discussion, and with very subtle analysis and very active presently also. Then I will point out that there are two lines of defense. First, the topic of economists has been essentially markets, explaining markets, understanding markets. And then, is this hypothesis rather well for understanding markets? And second, there is the fact that, as I just said, there has been long studies of altruism. But also, what they do is worse than this assumption. If the assumption is a mistake, there is the general suspicion that this is the unique motivation of individuals, or at least a favorite explanation of other behavior is that it derives from self-interest. And this is worse than that actually they do not only find that, they seem to think that self-interest is pervasive, but in addition, they find this very good. And there has been some praise of self-interest, and even some very famous economists, including from the University of Chicago, but not only them, saying that the duty of an actor in the economy is to follow his self-interest. Then I'll go to one of the most active field of economic research presently, is explaining philanthropy. And so we'll see what economics does or can do along this line. Then I'll go on noticing that the founder of classical economy were very eager of this question, very aware of this question. I'll relate a small discussion between Léon Walras and the mathematician Henri Poincaré. Then I'll go to the tradition of Pareto, which is especially important in this respect. And Pareto disagrees with one presentation of the last session, which is that people should have only one thing to maximize. For Pareto, there are two things to maximize, and we'll see how he defines that in the field. Then from this, we'll go back historically to Adam Smith, because Pareto would have found his idea, in particular, in Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. Then there has been discussion of that, an interesting discussion of that at the time of Adam Smith, by a major thinker who is Sophie de Condorcet, a lady, the wife of the better-known Condorcet. And then I'll relate a dispute from Auguste Comte and John Stuart Mill about altruism, a word coined by Auguste Comte. And then we'll see how we can solve how it is in fact that people are sometimes altruists, sometimes not altruists, and what has been said about that. Actually, presently, most of altruistic studies, by which I mean studies of altruism in economics, focus on two fields, which is natural, families and philanthropy, as I just said. Then I'll go on the discussion of philanthropy, explaining philanthropy, which is not that easy and which requires other assumptions, we will see. Then we will see that another explanation of large giving is the possibility of cooperative altruism, which can include issues, theories of social contract, theories of the general will, ruled altruism, and the issue of Kant with some irrationality in Kant's theory, which I'll notice. Then, if we have time, but I doubt it, we'll go to the field of reciprocity. And so there are two particular applications of the general theory of reciprocity which can explain these philanthropic altruism, which is putative reciprocity, hypothetical putative reciprocity, and lateral reciprocity that is matching. That means, given that others do their share, I'll do my share, and so on. And then, if we have time, we'll finish by 3 remarks about the question of the various way of dealing with the question of economic efficiency and solidarity. The issue, there has been the issue of the famous remark, what do economists economize on? And the answer should be they economize on love and altruism. And we'll see what it means. And if there are virtues which are solved, which are saved by not using them too much, which is the opposite of what Aristotle has said about virtues. And then we may mention what I call the normative inverse conduct problem. Let me mention that when I spoke of cooperative altruism and so on, these are theories which are basically in political philosophy or in politics or in ideology, but which had been studied by economists with the tools and the concept of economists. So that's why I include them in this direction. Now, if we have to stop, so the normative inverse conduct problem, by conduct I mean behavior plus its motive. So a direct conduct problem is given motives like self-interest, values, and so on. What are the acts of the agents, given their motives, and the resulting state of society? But the inverse problem is, given some state of society, what resulting from acts of the agents, what are the motives which can explain them? And in particular, the normative problem, given some desired state of society, for instance, for distribution, for relations between people, for also the quality of people themselves, what motives can answer this, can satisfy what we are looking for. What is, in particular, what is the proper place of self-interest? What values or other values should we have, and where to apply them? And this gives an agenda for education, by which I mean education at all ages. Now, if as it is very likely we have not time to discuss all that, let me say that there is a written paper, not only the slides, but an explicitly written paper, and presumably it can be asked at the institute, and I agree that anybody takes a copy of the paper or has it communicated to him by whatever means. Now, so as I said, economists have a reputation. It is not all rosy. They have been criticized on several grounds, sometimes for their forecasts or for other things, and in particular, a main reproach addressed to them is their view of the human person. Now, the worldview of economists has been called the dismal science. This was in part because of Malthus' dark forecasts, and in part because of this assumption of the human nature, Homo economicus. So they are accused to consider that people are only selfish. Now, the core model of elementary economists certainly assumes that. And in fact, most economic studies also assume that. But as I noted, this is still worse for two reasons. First, the favorite explanation of non-self-interested acts, favored explanation by the subculture of economists, let me say globally, of a non-self-interested act, since there obviously are non-self-interested acts, is to show that they are suspect of indirect or hidden self-interest. And any claim of moral behavior is suspected of Pharisianism, which shows something in the right direction. The person is not only selfish, but in addition a hypocrite. We will see several examples. One will be the warm glow theory of giving, which we shall discuss shortly, and which is very common notably in this continent among economists of North America, to explain philanthropy, and which has a serious problem of logic. Sometimes it shows in the vocabulary. For instance, there is something which is sequential exchange. That means that someone yields something to someone else, and the other yields the other thing, and so on, and each one yields in order that the process continues. And this can be completely self-interested. That means the yield is not a gift in the proper sense of the term. And so some economists have called this reciprocity, whereas for a long time in the social science, reciprocity is restricted to this kind, to such transfers, but when they are gift, actually the simplest form is just what is called the gift-return gift relationship, not self-interested. They are gift. Now, the same people also wanted to emphasize the existence of negative reciprocity, that is revenge, retaliation. Now, when some economists, those or others, wanted to convince their colleagues of the mistake of the doxa of pure self-interest, they had to resort to some experiments, laboratory experiments, which are by now rather numerous. which are very simplistic experiment, like called the dictator game, ultimator game. They are not really game even. And what they show is that people use some fairness. Now, fairness is not necessarily altruism, but if it is fairness between someone and somebody else, and this is this first person to give something to the other, at least this leads to give to, it is some kind, I don't know if this is altruism, but anyway. So, however, what these experiments show is essentially something which is obvious from the great experiment of one's life, not only the too hastily rejected introspection, but just seeing the behavior of innumerable people whom you think we can understand in the Verstehen emphatic sense. And these experiments are of little help for the two main fields, which are, as I said, the family, because we have interesting interacting relations of closely related people, and also philanthropy, because you have many altruists. Actually, I think we can say that everybody wants someone in great need to be helped in some sense. So you see that this is the extreme case of a public good. It's a universal moral public good. And of course, this cannot be really shown in small experiments. Now, as I said, a main field of economic studies presently is the study of, or trying to explain philanthropy. Now, people wanted to explain that met a problem. The following problem. Presently, there are, in our civilizations, vast amounts of resources are transferred from the people who are, from the non-poor people to poor people. So I'll use the term of poverty, but let me also make precise. What I mean by poverty is la misère, dear poverty, real basic needs, and so on. Now, actually, so there are vast amounts which are transferred, but they are transferred in two ways. First by gifts privately in charity, in philanthropy, and second by fiscal public transfers by governments. Now, this raises a problem, which is the following problem. If the government gives me the bread I need, and apart from that, takes as a tax the price of the bread, I will diminish my purchase of bread by this amount. If what he gives me does not completely satisfy my needs, I will just buy the remainder. But you see that my purchase, so the vocabulary, the classical vocabulary is that government care of my bread crowds out my purchase of bread. Similarly, when there is someone who gives to the needy, and in addition is taxed, both he is a giver and he pays as a tax, is taxed by a tax which is used to help the needy also. If this tax is increased, he will diminish his gift accordingly. The tax crowds out the gift. And then, if there remains some gift for this person, then you cannot justify the tax, and you cannot find the optimal amount of the tax. And if there is no gift left, then you cannot explain the gifts that you observe. So this was a dilemma which was faced by this field of study. Now, one solution is to consider that people have preference not only about their own income for their consumption and about the income of the poor, but also for specifically what they give. But this one explained in different ways on both sides of the Atlantic. On this side, the most favored explanation what's called the warm glow theory. Why do people have preferences not only on the welfare of the poor but also on their own gift? So the idea is that this makes them feel praiseworthy, and this gives them an agreeable feeling of warm glow. However, this has in itself a contradiction, because the gift certainly helps the poor. So that's a good thing. But this is not the motive of this specific gift. The motive is to have the warm glow. And to have a warm glow is not something which is praiseworthy a priori. So there is an inconsistency in this theory. However, this does not prevent this theory to have some explanatory power. I think that certainly people can live with this inconsistency and give from warm glow reason in spite of this fact. In addition, this is let me say, the stronger warm glow. It is also the case that the gift by itself is useful, and because of that, the giver indirectly is useful. So there can be also some praiseworthiness just for the gift and its effect. And in particular, this can lead to praise, to effective praise of the giver by the people who are concerned by the welfare of the poor, by the poor themselves. They may be grateful by the people who are concerned by the welfare of the poor. No, and we can, and of course there is okay. We'll see later. Now, in other places, the approach was a bit different, at least different from the strong warm glow effect which I described at the beginning. The start one was from the classical philosophical theory of action. This classical theory divides actions in two categories, and they call that consequentialism and deontology, which are some strange names sometimes. According as the action is wanted for its consequences or is wanted in itself. When it is wanted in itself, this is the case of a duty to act and of a norm of acting. Now, this norm can be social or moral or both. As we know, if you want to know if a norm is social or moral, violate it. If you feel ashamed, it is social. If you feel guilty, it is moral. If you feel both, it is both. Now, of course, the welfare of the poor is a consequence. Now, this classical distinction of philosophy is very important, but it also has a problem of consistency, because each category can be seen as a particular case of the other. Indeed, you may want the consequence of having acted, and you may have the duty to desire some specific consequence. Now, the duty or norm is how, I think, the religions act on the giving. Although some of them, I don't know if I can say all of them, but some of them want, in addition, of course, some compassion or some love for the people who are helped. So I know this is true for Christianity or for Buddhism. I do not know for the others. For instance, I think Islam demands alms. Does it demand more than that? I do not know. I didn't have the occasion to ask. In addition, as I mentioned, there are the issue of cooperative solutions, which is beyond the question whether it is handed out privately or by public transfers. And the cooperative solutions act through the formation, psychologically, through the formations of norms or of duty. Duty to obey the general will, or to respect a social contract, and so on. Now, let me just mention that, let me. So I come back on the first page, and there is a quote on the bottom of the page. L'homme n'est ni ange ni bête, et qui veut faire l'ange fait la bête. Man is neither angel nor beast, and he who wants to play an angel plays a beast. Now, was it written by some economist with their dim view of human nature, or perhaps this is someone? This was said about the time when Father Marquette put his feet in Chicago down from his canoe, that in the 17th century. But this was written in Europe by someone who had many capacities as mathematician, probabilist, philosopher, and maybe he deserved, in addition, to be named a honorary economist. And this was Blaise Pascal. And also, his remark may also be an early critique of warm glow theory, which I mentioned. So now let me yes. So I just noted that not only in the general ethos of economics, not only selfishness is the favorite assumption, but in addition, quite often they or you or we find this very good. Not only is it assumed, but it is praised. And sometimes, even if people are not that self-interested, at least they should be. And sometimes, for policies, it is more important to know what should be rather than what is. And some notable economist has even said that economic agents have only one duty: to pursue as eagerly as possible their self-interest. For instance, this was said by Milton Friedman, a well-known economist from here, let me say, but also with some embroideries by Maurice Allais. And this remark is the descent from the wise remark well-known and wise remark of Adam Smith that you should expect your bread not from the altruism of the baker, but from her self-interest. You should better expect your bread from the self-interest of the baker rather than from her altruism. But it is also the descent of Bernard de Mandeville's cynical fable of the bees, saying that private vices give public benefits and therefore are public virtues. Actually, many vices can boost the economy. And when the bees amend and turn virtuous, the hive dies. Now, the novelist André Gide has said, one does not make good literature with good sentiments. No, can what make good economics or a good economy only with bad sentiments? Now, actually, there has been two defenses. First, as I noted, the main field of study is markets, and it may be that self-interest in markets is not an outrageous hypothesis. But of course, it is not at all the complete picture, because even in markets and in exchange, people respect the others, most of the time respect the others, respect their property, respect their promises, more or less respect truth, and they do this not only because of fear of self-defense, retaliation, or the police. And some people prefer a fair deal to a good deal. So that means there is a kind of market morality which is extremely important. For some market, it's absolutely necessary. If we had to rely only on to have this respect, which I said, on courts, the police, complete contracts, detailed checking, and so on, this would be extremely costly and sometimes quite impossible. Therefore, many markets absolutely need this market morality, and the market system as a whole certainly needs that. And the second line of defense is, as I also noted, that economists have studied altruism for long and quite a lot, and actually all great historical economists have studied altruism, although sometimes in separate works, which shows that even when they acknowledge the existence of altruism, they tend to say that it is out of economics, of the field of the economy. Sometimes they refer to sociology, and we'll see the origin of that. Now, in particular, the founders of classical economics were very eager to know the properties of the function. The function is taken in a mathematical sense, of the function they assumed individuals were maximizing, what's called their utility function. And the properties are the formal properties, but also the psychological properties, their tangible meaning, psychological or social property. For instance, Léon Walras sent his equations to the mathematician Henri Poincaré, who replied, all you need is a function defined up to an increasing function, giving the first definition of an ordinal utility, and he added, you assume that people have perfect foresight and perfect selfishness. perfect foresight is a mistake, but perfect selfishness is worse, it is a calumny. Now, Walras answered that he would introduce imperfect foresight and that to drop perfect selfishness is something which he would also do, but that it is better done in a different work, which he did actually, but he did not develop, he did not go, when in application, he did not go to philanthropy, but rather to a field which is sometimes called the social economy, and now I think it was mentioned by, during the last session, the civil economy, which is a very ambiguous term, with, in particular, the study of cooperatives, of stable and efficient cooperative, and other kind of, and in his framework, it was at this time the ideology of a movement called Solidarism, which was a movement of during the Third Republic of France, in particular with the economist Charles Gide, uncle of André, and the political leader Léon Bourgeois. Now, Pareto also defined ordinal utility the same year in the same place, which was Paris, where he was visiting for a year. Although he also used all other kinds of utilities, cardinal utility, and using differential forms only, which in a sense make ordinal be a kind of cardinal. But the most important for our purpose and in itself is the meaning that Pareto put to that. Now, most students who begin their economic course here, an individual has one function, as I said, which is the utility function. In contrast, I heard each individual has two functions. And I was taught economy by a man called François Divisia, who had been a student of Pareto, and this was Pareto's word. And the two functions are the utility function and the offre limitée function. Offre limitée means basically welfare is in the most common and ordinary sense. That is, the offre limitée function is what is usually called utility function in the most elementary courses of economics. Now, Pareto also had utility, and an individual utility is an increasing function of everybody's offre limitée function, including the offre limitée of the person who has this utility I mentioned. What this describes is universal altruism. Everybody enjoys the fact that the welfare of anybody else is higher. And Pareto said that offre limitée is maximized in the sphere of the economy and utility is maximized in the sphere of sociology. Now, Isidro Edgeworth has also made a similar assumption for two individual and linear utility functions. Now, of course, this implies something for a favorite concept of economics, which is Pareto efficiency. Pareto efficiency means to be in a situation such that there is no other situation which makes everybody better off. And this is actually the basis of the praise of self-interest, which I mentioned earlier. In a system, in a society where people interact by exchange, then if they are self-interested, this puts the society in a state of Pareto efficiency, which is certainly a quality of society. It is a necessary quality. It is not a sufficient quality because this does not prevent that that most people die of hunger. So that means it doesn't say much about the distribution. Now, since now we have two types of functions with Pareto, off-a-limité and utility, then we have two types of Pareto efficiency, one with off-a-limité and one with utility. Now, since if all off-a-limités are increased with perhaps no change for some of them, but not all, then because utilities are increasing function of the off-a-limités, this implies that the utility functions are increased, and this implies that utility Pareto efficiency requires and implies off-a-limité Pareto efficiency. And actually, Isidro Edwards had the same conclusion, which is what he called the shrinking of the contract curve. Now, markets give off-a-limité efficiency, and this is Pareto's market theory, by the way, which means that by leaving market, you can be in a, as I said, by leaving market, you can be in a situation which is off-a-limité Pareto efficient, but not utility Pareto efficient. Therefore, there is another state of society where everybody's utility is higher. And this can be considered as a basic market failure. And the consequence is that there should be another system of cooperative behavior than the market system, certainly in addition, not replacing it, but in addition to it. We should take care of that. Practically, this would mean making transfers from the people who have the higher utility to higher off-a-limité to people who have the lower off-a-limité, assuming comparability, which is a classical, in particular in welfare policies. Now, where did Pareto find his idea of universal altruism? Probably just by reflection and observation. But he may also have read something similar in Adam Smith's book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. In this book, Adam Smith explains that every individual is happier from the happiness of any other individual. Now, in the best description, however, is that Adam Smith is describing empathy. Now, this term was invented only at the beginning of the 20th century, but this is what he was describing. In addition, he assumed that each individual has in his breast, as he said, an impartial spectator. That means, in addition, people are impartial. That means impartiality in particular between their own self-interest and the self-interest, or off-a-limité and the off-a-limité, or self-interest or happiness of other people. So this gives two reasons for this. Yeah, okay. And so this was the first book. This is the beginning of the first book of the supposed founding father of economics, about his first book about society. He had written another one about astronomy before. Now, Pareto probably read this book in French, and this is advised. because in the French translation there is one chapter more than in the English original. And this is an interesting chapter. And I refer to the second translation made by the outstanding thinker Marchioness, later citizen, Sophie de Condorcet. So wife of the other Condorcet, and she is the great Condorcet, and she was the wife of the not-so-small other Condorcet. And the extra chapter consists, has been written by her. It consists of 8 letters on sympathy. And she reproaches Adam Smith several things, which she tried to correct. First, Adam Smith's aim was to explain moral sentiments from empathy, but he does not explain empathy. And second, he forgets the role of reason when this is applied to in helping or giving or in the propensity of that through sympathy, is how he said. And then she tried to explain empathy from a theory of sensations. So she said that every pain causes 2 sentiments. A one which is focused and another one which is more general and milder. And when we see the pain of somebody else, you reflect the milder sentiment only. And the same when you remind yourself of some pain. Now, the best way one can to make sense of Sophie's theory with our present knowledge is to refer to the mirror neurons in neurology, or to the VEN, von economy neurons, which describes something similar to what she was saying. Okay, so the last remark I'll do right now is just that altruism was a word coined by the Parisian sociologist. He also coined this term, sociology, Auguste Comte. But for Auguste Comte, altruism means accepting to benefit someone else at a cost for oneself which is higher than the benefit received by the other person. And Auguste Comte's friend, John Stuart Mill, of course disagreed. He disagreed that Comte called this a virtue. For John Stuart Mill, of course, the virtue was to weight equally all cost and benefit, whomever they occur. That is basically to be a Bentham utilitarian. We would have expected that. Now, so they had an exchange of letters, and Auguste Comte replied that this does not prevent that useful philosopher, that impecunious useful philosopher should be helped. Could Mill do something? Now, Mill referred to 2 wealthy friends of his who complied, but Auguste Comte reiterated his demand rather soon after that. Let me stop here, and as I said, there is a written paper which is available, and okay.